welcome back. It's Raccoon again with the Artist Pod, and today we'll be talking about how to draw a raccoon. As always, I'm using a Wacom Intuos Pro tablet, and I'm drawing straight into Photoshop. So, let's get arting. Okay, so here is the raccoon. Right, they have, sort of this dark strip up, dark, of course, on the eyes, a white above that goes down into the chin, and then another brownish but lighter than the eyes on the forehead. So we're going to get started. I'm going to draw everything in shadow first. And I'm talking about shadow. I know I say this every video, but for anyone who hasn't seen it, I'm not putting full pen pressure, right? It's just this light pen pressure. And I just sort of stay within the sort of fur tufts that I've drawn in, and just slowly build that up, right? And the difference, right, this is light pen pressure, this is full pen pressure, so it's significantly different. You can see that. Or adding more lines. More lines will brighten things up as well. But I'm going to stay within those fur tufts. You can see I even didn't quite fill in the nose all the way. Just doing a lot. And so if I take that off, wrong one, right, you can kind of still see how the fur is separated out. So I'm going to do the whole thing in shadow, all the colors. So the white, the dark by the eyes, the brown on the forehead. I'm going to do all of that in shadow because it's just this light pen pressure. And I'm basically just filling in these little things I created. Right, when I'm creating tufts, you can kind of see it better down here, right? You're just kind of like, doing that in between. And you're just making these little like tufts in the direction you think the fur would be going. When I'm sketching it in, it's a little bit time consuming, but pretty easy because I'm just going to stay within all of the lines that I've already created. So I'm going to get all that done in shadow, and I will be right back. So there's the sketch. Now I have already sketched out highlights as if the light source is coming from above and just off to the left. So you'll have some, you'll have shadowing more on this side. And just going to brighten up, stay within the confines of the fur I've already drawn, right? And add both more pen pressure and more lines, keeping in mind that light source. Now it makes it a little easier because I have already sketched out the where the shadows are going to be. So this is relatively straightforward, especially if you do what I did where you sketch out the shadows ahead of time. It's straightforward, just kind of like filling this in, because you are still just following the lines you've already done. I am keeping in mind for any changes or things that I got wrong, things I need to fill in a little bit more. Based on my light source, sometimes I make on-the-fly changes to something. But otherwise, right, so if I take that off, you'll have some of that happening, right? We do that for every color. The only other thing that sometimes I don't sketch in is right where the eye sweeps down. There would be some shadowing. Sometimes I don't necessarily sketch it, but it will be there because it's swooping down and into the eye. I always put, and this isn't necessarily accurate, but I always put a burst of light under an eye, even though this side is going to be a little bit more heavily shadowed. And all of this as well. So, when you have a light source, depending on your light source, depending on the angle, how extreme your light source is, it can change a lot of how you're shadowing your figure. And so always just sort of, that's one of the biggest considerations, is getting your lights and the highlight and shadow right. Now with raccoons, this little bit of dark pushes up. Right, so you have light source coming from just above and to the left. The eyes are kind of a bulge in our heads, so sometimes on the eye closest towards the light source, it'll dip down because that bulge is rounding away, whereas on the opposite side you have it bulging out, and so it would catch underneath. It's going to catch the cheeks. I have it catching a bit underneath, right? Chin, under the lips there, on the edges, and really on this side, you're going to have a lot of shadowing based on that light source. Although, again, you can make some changes on the fly depending on if you think it's good or not, that what you've sketched is good or not. Foreheads are going to have a little bit more highlighting than others, just because there's less to interfere. Right? On faces, you have a whole bunch of stuff happening. A lot of interference from a variety of sources. But foreheads, you have a little less. So this is really all it is filling in the raccoon, being mindful of where I've already indicated highlights and shadows would be. So I'm going to get this done real fast. I'll get the brown done, because I just noticed the spot I missed down here. Get the brown done real fast, and I'll be right back. Alright, so I'm going to get the white, and then we'll go back and deal with the little bit that I missed down here. Once I get the white in, it'll give me a better idea of exactly how things are looking. Because the white's such a big pop. But just like before, right, I'm going to get all of this done, all of the white done, and then I'll be right back. Gonna go back to start color real fast. Right, so I had a gap here, and some of that is because they have such, raccoons have such long little like tufts, and so as I'm shadowing, sometimes when I have like fur that's like this, I'm going to treat it a little differently than if it's like nice and flush against his face, right? So it's potentially some shadows in between the fur, but otherwise you would have some amount of highlight that's still pushing over. Now I did just change the highlight here a little bit more under the cheek, and I'm kind of making some random changes into the side that's on the highlight. So I draw out my highlights, or I'll sketch that out, but sometimes I'll make changes anyway, because as I'm doing it I'm like, that wouldn't quite be right, and so I'll shift and change. Okay. I actually do think that works pretty well. I'm going to go back to the white and do just a little bit more blending. So I did some blending here, but I didn't here. And the white is so bright, sometimes you have to do this where I back off the pin pressure, I back off how many lines I'm putting, but it just needs a little bit more than what I've given it in order to look right. Because it looks like, there's a strong line between highlight and shadow. You don't necessarily want there to be such a clear line in the sand. You just kind of want it to blend. And then maybe a few pieces here. Now the only other thing I'm going to do here, I think that blends. Let's come down here and just add for a few pieces. A little bit more. Right, it is his neck. There is shadowing here. And there would be shadowing here. But just like on the tips. Yeah, actually I think that turned out quite well. So raccoons do have fluffs in their ears. It's just sort of a little bit of white fluff on the inner side. Some animals have it all the way around. Raccoons have it, from what I can tell, just on the inside. You don't have to stay straight like I'm doing now. You can see I'm not putting a lot of pin pressure, but I am putting more lines. And now I am changing my direction a bit. Just layering up my lines. It would still be going into shadow when it enters the ear on the far side, but the tips of the hair be potentially catching the highlight. Over here, tips of the hair potentially going into shadow, and the base still going into shadow, so it's more of the midpoint of the hair that'd be potentially catching the highlight. Once again, building that up to what you get. And then just sort of blending that with the ear. Okay. Now, I probably should have looked this up because I'm not certain I'm right, but I'm going to go forward anyway. And that is, I'm going to take this dark color, and I'm just going to lightly fill in, because it's not white fluff here. I think it's just, the little bit of fur on the ear pushing in, which means it's super susceptible to the fact that it's going into the ear, so the deeper we go into the ear, the more it would become shadowed, because it's entering into a recess. So doing just enough so that clearly light is hitting some of it, right, and be entering the recess into the head, not way up above the head. And then basically the same thing on this side. More in shadow it is, the fewer lines, and obviously you still want very little pin pressure. And then we have his nose. Now I don't think I need this for the nose, but I just want to see what it did. Yeah. Okay, so I'll take it off. Right, coming from the left, so you have the highlight on this side, would be rounding down and in for the nostrils, so that would go into shadow. As it comes over, you have it going into shadow, and as it comes down, you might have a little bit where this kicks back out to catch the light. I'm just going to make this even. But otherwise, going into shadow. I'm blending that in just a little better. I'm gonna do the eyes next, which I'm gonna have as this brown. And then we're gonna add, before we're done, I'm gonna be adding in a burst of highlight in a different color, and then blue into the shadows, which should really also help make the raccoon pop. I mean, it's turned out pretty well, but that should really help it too. So you don't have to have him looking at us because it's looking off to the side. It's not like looking straight in at us. But I always draw on the pupil first, right? And then you do kind of a, half circle, semicircle around the eyes here, because you have the shadow from the eyelid above that's casting. That's what this is. So keep in mind the shape you're drawing. Might have him looking a little bit more this way. That's looking a little too far off. Let's just shift the gaze. I probably could have just... It's not hard to do, shifting a gaze like that, right? And especially if you're doing it digitally. If you're drawing it in, it might be a little harder because you got to erase. But you can play around with exactly where a pupil would be to look at you, to look off, to look up, to look, see how an eye would shift and change. Sometimes I usually like animals engaging with the viewer by looking at us. However, when I have these sort of more dramatic portraits where they're turned, I don't always do that because I think it adds a little bit more tension that they're not looking at us. Yeah, see, I think that's a little bit more accurate. I think it's looking more down his nose instead of, he was looking a little bit off to the left. Now he's just looking straight. It's just that, he's not straight on us. He's off 3/4 face. I am going to take elliptical marquee tool, come down here, make sure the eyes are nice and the same size. Sometimes I don't do this, sometimes I do. And I just erase out, and I'm going to select inverse, reselect the paintbrush tool, and come in along the eye at a different angle. It's just a way to ensure it's fully filled in. Come back up here, select inverse, reselect the elliptical marquee tool. That'll allow me to drag my selection over to the other eye, where I'm going to do the same thing. Just have to get it lined up right. And then select inverse and come in all over those angles. There we go, right? Like it defines the pupil a little bit more, which I like. Okay. So then we're going to have a burst of light on the opposite side of the light source. Light source is just off to the left, so it's going to be underneath and on the other side for both eyes. Right, this full pin pressure. And then you're going to fill in on the side of the light source going all the way underneath. Full pin pressure again for a highlight on the eye. Going into shadow at the edges here. And then going into shadow on the back side, but not as much as the edges, so this would be a little brighter. But you still want more weighted. Same thing over here. Here underneath. Going also into shadow at the edge. Because our eyes, typically there's like a little black or darker sort of ring around the edges of our eyes. Same thing over here, right, going into shadow on that back side. Last thing I typically do with eyes is sort of what I call a light flare. I do think I sketched it in. Yeah, we can play that by ear. I can also add another color if I wanted to, but light flare, right, just going to come in the highlighted section. Do the same thing on both sides. Might be a little less on the side away from the light source, right? Okay, so Now I'm going to take, this sort of brighter color, which I've kind of chosen an orangish, peachish kind of color. And in the more extreme highlights, I'm going to sort of just put that on, right? So like a bit on the nose, being mindful of the direction of where the light source is, right? Right, so all up in here. And all it's really doing is adding like a burst of highlight. Even though it's this sort of bright color, it certainly will make it kind of seem like the light source has this like warm glow to it. But some of why I'm doing this is based in color theory, like, right, warm colors push forward. So if you do this, you want like a warm color, and cool colors recede. That's why I'm going to use the blue for shadowing. And it really just kind of is picking and choosing where. Very much a play it by ear, see how it looks kind of thing. I don't have to add a lot. I don't have to like fully fill it in. Just sort of sporadically placing it. Since the light source is off to the left, this is going to be a little bit more left weighted than right up the center. There is some in the center. That's what that is, And I am going to do it above the eye over here and then under the eye over here. Highlighting eyes isn't necessarily a bad thing. Again, it's something we notice, so they're so important because we tend to notice eyes first. Now we're going to stay in the same tone but go to blue. Now for this, I'm basically going to be drawing in very light pin pressure into the areas that are already shadowed. Right, so just filling those spots in just very, very lightly. Don't want to put too much pin pressure because it's very easy to go wrong here, to overdo this. So the other thing I'm going to do with the blue, I guess I missed a few spots, right? Okay. As soon as I'm done, is fill in some of the gaps in between the fur, right? So like you have a big gap here, I'll fill in just very lightly here. Big gap here, nothing big. Again, still very light pin pressure, just a few lines. Just kind of where the bigger areas are. So not between all of them, since obviously there's a lot of gaps, but between ones that kind of stand out. That'll help kind of spread the blue throughout the raccoon. Now the last thing I'm going to do is pick and choose a few spots to brighten up the blue. I'm doing this on another layer. Right, so I just kind of fill in that a little bit more, right? Fill it in a little bit more. And this is definitely a pick and choose, spread out kind of thing. You don't want it all clustered in one spot. I'm not doing this to create a highlight. Doing something like this can add, can make it more dynamic, because you would have some bits of fur that are catching the light more than other bits of fur. So this is kind of doing that. Only on the shadows, so I'm not doing this on any of the lines I put in between. This is just on like the solid bits of shadow. Alright, so that's how you draw a raccoon. I hope that was helpful. In the floating nether next to me, I have other videos of art tutorials I have done, and I will see you all soon. Thank you so much. Take care.